Excellencies, dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who is with us on WebEx, to who is now joining us on Facebook Live, and to who will later watch this video. The Geneva Environment Network and the International Union for Conservation of Nature have the pleasure to welcome you today virtually for the 5th session of the Geneva Dialogues on Nature-based Solutions. The event today will focus on food, 10 days ahead of the United Nations Food Systems Summit that will take place during the United Nations General Assembly. We are very honored to have with us today two leading experts that are involved in the preparation of the Food Systems Summit. And our guest champion that you will discover later is also going to be involved with this summit. As you will hear from our guests and from our moderator, the Nature-based Solutions dialogues aim to facilitate further engagement and discussion among the stakeholders in International Geneva and beyond, in the lead up to a critical year for nature and society. Our nature-based solution journey is co-convened with IUCN, which headquarters are in our region, and they are an essential global actor bringing together the world's most influential organizations and experts to conserve nature and accelerate the transition to a sustainable world. We have again the pleasure to have experts from their network with us today, just a few days after the conclusion of the IUCN World Congress in Marseille. And we might hear also today what was discussed there that is relevant to food. Before I give the floor to John Davis, Senior Advisor on Agriculture at IUCN, who will guide you through our session today, let me briefly mention, for those who wouldn't yet know the Geneva Environment Network, that we are a network of more than 100 institutions and secretariats based in Geneva that make this region one of the global hubs for environmental governance. Administrated by the United Nations Environment Programme and supported by Switzerland, we organize various networking activities, including regular multi-stakeholder roundtables and briefings on major environmental trends. Let me also remind you that the documents presented today, the summary, as well as the video of the dialogue, will be made available on the webpage of the event. Throughout the event, you can raise your questions by using the Q&A box. We will use your questions to feed the discussion after the presentations. With that, John, over to you.
Great, thank you, Diana. And hello, everybody on the panel and in the audience today. Welcome to this Geneva Dialogue on Nature-based Solutions in Food. As has already been said, my name is Jonathan Davis, working at IUCN. I'm a conservation or sustainable development professional. I'm an agricultural economist by training, and actually I'm a farmer at heart. My career immediately after school was farming in the United Kingdom, where I originate, where I grew up. But I've spent most of my career working in Asia and Africa. I live in Kenya. I'm connected today from Nairobi. And I'm very pleased to be back working on sustainable agriculture after a break of quite a few years. I think this proves the saying we have in Britain that you can take the boy out of the farm, but you can never take the farm out of the boy. It's a real pleasure to have this opportunity today to moderate this discussion on nature-based solutions in food. It's really good timing, coming, as Diana said, just a few days before the UN Food Systems Summit, which I'm sure we're going to hear about today from some of our speakers. But it's also, just after Marseille, the World Conservation Congress, where we had a lot of discussions around management of landscapes and sustainable agriculture in particular. Trying to understand better the conservation value of sustainable farming. And one of the headline messages that stood out for me from Marseille was this growing acceptance that when you look at the size of the environmental challenges that confront us, really we are going to have to start talking seriously about behavioral change and change in values that we as a human society hold. Particularly when it comes to consumption, and perhaps no more so than when it comes to consumption of food. These are issues that sometimes have been swept under the carpet because they raise difficult questions, but there's growing willingness to discuss this. And I think this kind of underlines the importance of dealing with very complex system change when we're looking at the food and agriculture sector. So agricultural production and land management, which I focus more on, is an important part of the puzzle, and it's particularly relevant when we're talking about nature-based solutions. But we have to look at the whole system. for example, 30% of everything that we produce globally is lost or wasted, 30% of all food. We have major global inequalities. Globally, we produce more than enough food for everyone to enjoy a healthy diet, and yet we've got 750 million people in the world that are food insecure, maybe nearly 2 billion people that suffer from micronutrient deficiencies. So we've got real challenges, systemic challenges to confront. So we do need to think about consumption habits. And there were calls from some of our partners and members at the Congress in Marseille about looking at the true cost of food, taking that much more seriously. As I said, at IUCN, we currently focus much more on the land management side of things, which is particularly related to and actually builds on the great work that's been done on nature-based solutions over the last 2 or 3 years. I'd like to ask our tech team to present one slide on nature-based solutions. I'm sure many of you participated in these dialogues before, so you're familiar with this, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Just one slide just to talk about what we mean by nature-based solutions. And there's a definition in the small print on the left that was adopted actually 5 years ago at the previous IUCN, the World Conservation Congress in Hawaii, where we adopted this definition that nature-based solutions are actions to protect and sustainably manage and restore natural and modified ecosystems in ways that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, providing both human well-being and biodiversity benefits. The graphic captures everything in there in the nature-based solutions thinking. And I think a really fundamental part of it is this balance between human well-being and biodiversity benefits in order working with nature and restoring nature to address these major societal challenges. This work has been pushed forward in the last couple of years. In 2020, we adopted the Nature-based Solutions Standard, which is summarized in the second graphic on the right there. And it revolves around these 8 criteria. So criterion 1, nature-based solutions should address societal challenges such as food insecurity, water insecurity, risk and resilience, and so on. They should include design at scale. They should ensure a biodiversity net gain. They should be economically feasible. They should be built around inclusive governance. They require a balancing of trade-offs, and they require adaptive management. And finally, they should really mainstream and focus on long-term sustainability. And I'm not going to try and explain the details of that. The links to both the documents where both of these graphics can be found were in the invitation to this event. So if you're interested to read more, follow the links. You can download the documents and learn more about it and get in touch if you'd like to discuss further. Right now, the work on nature-based solutions is benefiting from the work we're developing to develop a certification scheme. And so see a real progress towards adopting and operationalizing nature-based solutions. There's a lot of appetite for nature-based solutions in many of the countries that we work in. So how does this all relate to agriculture? We focus on the societal benefits from sustainably managed agricultural landscapes. We start to see that actually there's quite a range of benefits that come when landscapes are put under more sustainable management. Agriculture fundamentally depends on nature for soil fertility, for soil moisture, for pollination and other services. But for various reasons, agriculture has contributed to degrading that nature. 40% of agricultural land around the world is affected by land degradation, major stress to pollinators that many crops depend on. So that supporting foundation for agriculture is being eroded by agriculture itself. Now, there's a lot of tried and tested farming approaches that can contribute to reversing this trend. You've probably heard of them referred to as agroecological approaches or regenerative farming, or others as many different labels and terms and approaches. One of the things that all of these approaches have in common is that they revive soil biodiversity and land health. Soil biodiversity is a fantastic indicator of land health, by the way. And in doing so, they improve the soil moisture, they improve the soil fertility, they protect habitat in and on the farms and in the surrounding landscapes. And to be considered truly sustainable, they should also mitigate agriculture's wider environmental footprint, for example, by reducing pollution of water bodies. So in IUCN, we're promoting this, or working on promoting sustainable agriculture through a vision of the common ground, which is, you can read about that in a report that we also published in 2020. And there's also a link to this in the invitation to today's meeting. And our work around this kind of vision of common ground revolves around two interpretations of the common ground. One of them is the ground itself, the land, you know, the idea that land is a common factor in sustainable farming, and the land's health and the soil really are at the heart of everything that we want to achieve. And it's a really good entry point for rapidly accelerating progress in sustainable agriculture. If you remember that criterion here, design at scale, criteria 2 of nature-based solutions, we really want to see rapid scaling up of sustainable farming practices in landscapes and nationally and globally. And the second interpretation of common ground, of course, is bringing actors together and looking for that convergence between actors in the conservation and the agriculture sector, so that we shift the focus from all of the things we disagree on and trying to blame the agriculture sector for all of the challenges that the environment sector faces, and instead looking at where we can make rapid progress on the things that we do agree on. And again, land health and soil biodiversity is an obvious entry point there. Maybe one caveat to that is to say that in all of our discussions, one really important thing we have to remember is the diversity of national food systems around the world and the goals of both farmers and governments. And remember that some countries are still confronted with serious food security and malnutrition challenges. It's easy to forget that when you're working on sustainable agriculture policies in Switzerland, in Europe, or in the United States. We have to ensure that the global food agriculture system is both sustainable and just. We want to promote a just transition in the food agriculture system globally. Diana in the opening already mentioned that this is a big year. We've got these huge opportunities that we can't afford to miss. We've got these climate change negotiations in Glasgow. We'll have biodiversity negotiations in Kunming. And we've got other big opportunities. The UN Food Systems Summit coming in a week or so is not among the least by far. So how do we ensure that these instruments, these opportunities, set environmental targets that are really inspiring to farmers and to other agriculture actors? How do we bring farmers into the fight to ensure the environment's managed more sustainably? How do we ensure that we partner proactively with farmers and agribusinesses rather than trying to impose rules upon them? How do we actually meet them and work with them to adopt practices that are in their interest as well as the interest of the wider society? And how do farmers and other actors benefit from sustainable farming? How can we amplify those benefits so that they translate into real income for farmers? These are the sort of questions I have in mind, and I hope to hear some answers on these questions from today's speakers. We're going to hear from an agricultural scientist and advocate. We're going to hear from a public servant. We're going to hear from an Indigenous peoples representative, no doubt with very different perspectives on nature-based solutions, food and agriculture. We regret that we don't have a representative from the private sector. We did have one lined up. We had a plan B lined up, but unfortunately, we cancelled at the last minute. They're an important actor in this, and certainly in our work, and I know the work of some of the other panelists here, we really see engagement of the private sector as fundamental to this. Not present today, unfortunately. Anyway, what we will do first is move to one of our speakers called James Lomax, who is a food systems and agriculture advisor at the UN Environment Program here in Nairobi also. And he is seconded to the UN Food Systems Summit. James joined UNEP in 2009, where he leads work on mainstreaming sustainable consumption and production practices from farm to flush. James pioneered the idea of systems thinking to ensure a shift from more sustainable food systems, or shift to more sustainable food systems, I should say. And before joining UNEP, he worked in commercial food production and farming in Europe and East Africa. So James, welcome to this dialogue. Could you help us by telling us a bit more about the upcoming UN Food Systems Summit, what the recent developments in the UN system are to mainstream nature-based solutions and agricultural practices, and what kind of barriers and solutions should we be looking out for?
Thank you so much, John. And it always makes me laugh when I see these pictures that we put up of ourselves, and we all seem to be wearing suits and ties. And then actually when it comes to us actually sitting at home phoning in remotely, of course, we lose the tie, we lose the jacket. Thank you so much. And of course, what you've done, John, is you've kind of given all the background, why we worry about this stuff in agriculture, why it's important, why nature-based solutions are so important in the food systems. But look, I've got, I don't know, 4.5 minutes now where I'm just going to zero in on the summit briefly, and then talk about sort of how I think nature's been mainstreamed, and then we can go on to this issue of barriers, which, by the way, is a whole week of workshops to kind of go through. I think I'd struggle to do it in 30 seconds. So very quickly, the summit is going to be on the 23rd of September, and it's going to be one day where we have an incredible opportunity as the UN and as member states and the wider involved public, if you like, and stakeholders to get involved in the dialogue and the discussion about what food systems means. And it's really one of its kind, because we talk about food systems, but in reality, food systems really came out as a concept, I would say, I don't know, 8-9 years ago. And it's only really the last 3 or 4 years that it's become mainstream. So one of the barriers we've had, I think, about adopting this idea of food systems, bearing in mind that I think the research that's come out now is, and the lessons learned that are coming out now is showing that by taking a food systems approach, the acceleration to achieving SDG 2030 could be much higher and much more improved by taking this approach. The barrier, if you like, has been with countries. Countries, we all work in silos at the UN, etc. And I think when it comes to food systems, we're talking about, so how does environment, a little bit like how you discussed with MBS, how does environment interact with health? How does health interact with agriculture, etc., etc. Now, the opportunity that lands here is that we have 150 plus countries that have agreed to do a food systems summit dialogue. And a food systems summit dialogue is exactly what I've just said. It's a journey of, if you like, self-realization at the country level to understand, oh, okay, where does a country stand when it comes to their own food systems? And I think that's really interesting. It's generating a lot of tension, a lot of discussion, and actually quite a lot of pathways forward. And one of the things that makes it so exciting from my side is that as of next week, so the 23rd of September, we expect to have 50 plus countries presenting and confirming that they are going to be taking sustainable food systems pathways forward, and that's huge. And then Frank will talk to you more about, if you like, the action track structure that exists in the summit. So a real opportunity, if you like, to go from normative and large scale, high level stuff down to some really nitty gritty country level plans. And of course, nature and NBS, as you've described, has been very, and if you like, the whole spirit of taking this approach is very much mainstreamed within the summit. We're seeing that the Secretary General will call for 3 areas on people, prosperity, and planet. And as we know, Secretary General Gutierrez very much puts his own efforts towards climate. It's a climate biodiversity. He's a real advocate for that. So it feels good that we're putting people, prosperity, and planet very much at the same billing, if you like, when it comes to the outcomes. And then the last bit, I'll just touch on it briefly, is what do we think the issues are, and what do we think the barriers are? Well, the barrier that I see very strongly here is that the food system is exactly that. It is a system, and it's a system which is very much interrelated and has evolved very strongly from from economic policies, from social policies, and it's politically a very big, well, it's a hot potato in many countries too, and it's evolved I mean, the food system has evolved for 10,000 years, but specifically from 1950s, I think from the Green Revolution, we have seen a consolidation of seed producers. We have seen a real kind of change in the dynamic, and we've seen industries grow around this particular food system, around the way that we produce and in the end consume food. So John, I completely agree with you when you say we've got to take consumption seriously. Absolutely. But we also shouldn't see that the solution lies absolutely with the consumer, because the consumer, we're all consumers, and quite frankly, we all make silly decisions more often than not, right? So I think the system, if you like, sort of pushes consumers in a certain way. They certainly push producers down a certain route. So I think this very much consolidated food system, which is supported by policy, it's very much ingrained and entrenched. I think this is the thing that's stopping NBS truly at scale from coming up. So that's me, and I'll pass you over back to you, John. Thanks.
That's great. Well, thank you, James. Very useful starting point for us. I'm going to hand it straight over now to Frank Ihorn, who is the CEO of Biovision Foundation and an established expert in organic agriculture with a PhD in environmental science and more than 20 years of experience in an international cooperation. Frank describes himself as a pragmatic strategist and advocate for sustainable agriculture and rural development, linking practical field experience with business, policy, and communication. He's got a wide range of experience in the field, and he's currently advocating for supportive policy frameworks and increased investment in agricultural solutions in the UN Food Systems Summit. So Frank, again, welcome to the dialogue. Can you tell us about the UN Food Systems Summit from the civil society perspective and from the perspective of Biovision, and tell us more about the most relevant practices that can be rolled out to maintain and conserve biodiversity in agricultural soils and landscapes?
I will do that. Thanks so much, John, for the introduction and for having me here. I think I can catch up right from where James ended, the UN Food Systems Summit. And let me start by saying, I mean, people know it is quite a controversy around this summit, particularly among civil society organizations. And we, Biovision, we are among those many organizations who decided to use this opportunity to say, hey, let's think together with the whole world about how we look at food. And I believe that the Food Systems Summit, with all the criticism around it, it has achieved two main things. First, that food is absolutely central to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And secondly, that we need to apply a systems perspective. You had earlier outlined how everything is connected, how everything is interlinked. The agriculture, the environment, health, livelihoods, resilience, all these aspects have to be considered as a whole. You can't just look at productivity alone or look at diets alone. And I think that's the beauty of what has happened and is happening now, that in so many countries there are these dialogues and everybody agrees, hey, these things are connected. We have to look at them in a holistic way. Within the Food Systems Summit, I had the privilege to participate in the action track number 3, which is on nature-positive solutions, together with many, many other people, scientists, NGOs, private sector, government representatives. And in that action track, basically, we looked at all the propositions which came from the whole world. I think around 375 proposals for so-called game-changing solutions related to nature-positive production. And we had the job to consolidate them into 12 clusters. And you see them here displayed. And as you see, they're quite in a wide range, reaching from land and freshwater aspects, or from deforestation, the global soil hub, aquatic resources, grasslands, savannas, And they are divided into these three sections: protect, manage, and restore. And I think in the protect side, it's the closest to where IUCN is coming from. But we also see there is a vast area of actions in the area of managing agricultural production systems or aquatic production systems. Nature-based solutions are central to all these proposals which are in here, and I just want to pick out one in which we are also particularly engaged. And John, you had already mentioned it in the beginning: agroecology and regenerative agriculture. Let me briefly explain a bit what is behind that. I mean, many of you are probably familiar with the term agroecology. It's a science, it's a practice, but it's also a social movement. And it's based on 13 principles, which also came out from the high-level panel of experts, a report from the Committee on World Food Security, the CFS. And in these 13 principles, you see that diversity is absolutely key. It's key in the production side, biodiversity, but also in the economic diversification. And soil health is also a very essential principle in that. You see at the center here also there is not only the farm with all the resources, all the practices and the aspects, but also the entire food system where communities, value chains, and policies are coming in. And I think what's important to keep in mind is that these principles, that's not just like a philosophy or an approach, but it's really a way how you can transition from either subsistence agriculture or industrial agriculture to a very diversified farming system, which is then giving space for biodiversity also to thrive. Around this agroecology concept or solutions clusters, a coalition has been built, which is now involving more and more governments, but also other organizations. A coalition which says, hey, we need to work together. We need to work on the funding side. We need to work on the research side. We need to work also on the policy side to advance the scaling up of agroecological approaches. If you're interested in that, have a look at the Food Systems Summit website. You find more information about the coalition. Now, in all these nature-based solutions which came out from the Food Systems Summit, but also what we are seeing in the world, you could point out many, many different practices. And I just show one to show the principle, the concept. And that's a methodology we had helped to develop and to disseminate in Eastern Africa. It's the Pushpull technology, where you basically start from a problem perceived from the farmers, strong weed infestation in maize and an infestation of stem borers. And instead of just using herbicides and pesticides, the technology which was developed by local scientists in collaboration with farmers was to integrate certain intercrops, Desmodium, a leguminous plant, and also to grow certain fodder crops at the boundary of the field. And there's a lot of intelligence behind that. The Desmodium is pushing away through certain volatile chemicals, the insect pests out of the field, so that's the push component. And at the same time, the Napier grass, this fodder crop, is attracting these pests so that they are breeding on them. Also, the Desmodium has an effect to stop the growth of the striga weed, which is a parasite of the roots of maize crops. And in that way, it's not only keeping the soil moist, building up soil fertility, but it's also suppressing this very disastrous weed. And the effect, as you can see on the slide, is that you can do farming without chemicals, without pesticides and weedicides. You can enhance at the same time soil fertility, produce better yields, increase also the fodder production, which enables farmers to diversify and to get additional income. So altogether, it's a systems approach which really works in practice. And I think this example shows that it's really important to also work with the farmers to develop the technologies together with them, and not just come with one silver bullet approach. Now, there are many technologies like these, co-created with indigenous people, with local communities, disseminated by NGOs, by government agencies. And I think it's really important that we are not only looking at the technical solutions, but also at the supporting ecosystem, which is bringing them to scale. I think I end here. After my 5 minutes are probably already over, and I look forward to the discussion with you.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Frank, and particularly thank you for a very concrete example of nature-based solutions. That's something that we've been challenging ourselves to do better, to go from a big concept to some real practical solutions. And I like the fact that you're talking about something locally, based on local knowledge, co-created with farmers. I think that's a principle of nature-based solutions. One other thing that stood out for me there, when you start talking about how these practices improve soil moisture, you're starting to get into the wider ecosystem functions. And I think that's often neglected in conservation. People think about species and they forget that biodiversity is from the gene to the species to the ecosystems. And maybe we'll come back and discuss that further, the role of agroecological practices, for example, in maintaining vast agricultural ecosystems. But before we come back to that, and I want to move on to our third panelist, who is Alan Ndagije, who is a diplomat from Uganda, based in Geneva in the Ugandan delegation. He's the focal point of the permanent mission of Uganda for quite a host of different international institutions, including the World Intellectual Property Organization, the World Health Organization, UN Environment Matters, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, and a number of other institutions whose acronyms I don't even recognize. Alan, real pleasure to have you here today. I'd like to hear from you about the role of nature-based solutions in the context of social economic transformation of Uganda, and particularly in the agriculture sector, in a country that is still striving for food security and resilience in the agriculture sector.
Thank you so much, Davis. Thank you for inviting Uganda to intervene in this dialogue. I'll go straight to our country and to the question at hand. And, as we're all aware, Uganda is predominant agriculture based, and most, if not all of us are agriculture dependent. So as a country, we've, transformed from a period when deforestation was taking up the whole landscape, and trees had been cut down. And agriculture, being the main activity in Kampala or in Uganda, is rain-fed. Our agriculture is rain-fed. It's not that we have irrigation facilities that, that advance or, that are predominant in developed countries. So being agricultural dependent and rain-fed agriculture, we had, of course, issues with the deforestation and climate change and, drought and drop in harvests, food security becoming a big problem. But now, with time, of course, with government of Uganda policies of reforestation, and planting trees, encouraging people not to reclaim wetlands, discouraging or penalizing people who are in wetlands just to conserve conserve nature. So to answer mostly our question, given that agriculture is the main livelihood of people and food security that comes out of it, and economic development, we have since shifted from about 24% of forest, that between 1990 and 2015, Uganda's forest cover shrunk from 24% to 9%, but to date has recovered to 12.5% thanks to policies that encourage private tree plantations that act as buffers to forest protection. Uganda's tropical forests also encourage or produce or basically involved in rainfall generation that of course generates power because of our rivers and lakes that we generate power from. So in the long run, having electricity that is generally rain fed or power hydro dams and that fed by rainwaters has encouraged industrial development, not as at high level at the moment, but at least we have electricity and industries and and our small scale factories are able to generate power and produce goods and services. Also, in terms if food, because still electricity is not something that most households in Uganda will able to afford. So we still have issues of deforestation, for charcoal or for for firewood. Just because that most households won't afford electricity cooking. But as a government, of course, we have policies that are encouraging households to, to use alternative sources of energy, like like animal dung that produces solar power or solar sunshine or solar energy that is produced to encourage households to use alternative sources of energy as opposed to cutting down trees to generate firewood or or charcoal. I'll go on the economic activities that have the nature-based solution for socio-economic transformation of Uganda. Given the time constraint, I'll try to summarize. So in Uganda, agriculture has contributed about 24% to Uganda's GDP. So besides agriculture being the major source of livelihood in Uganda, the bigger proportion of the working population in Uganda is involved in forestry and fishing. These are, nature-based solutions to livelihoods. And further, the further 38% of persons are employed in higher proportions. Males are mostly involved in this kind of activity of fishing as compared to females. So in terms of gender, disaggregation, you see that the males or the man gender is mostly involved as compared to the women who are in the value chain of production are still in the lower value chain of production. And I would like to summarize and indicate that poverty reduction has through income generation of farming has reduced to, and due to interventions in this nature-based solutions has reduced by a big percentage, and food security and nutrition levels improved, quality of life in terms of the second sustainable development goal of eradicating extreme hunger, and the third of access to health. Also, I would like to say education opportunity through research, through curricula and university program in agriculture sciences have been improved because of our nature-based solutions to livelihoods. Also, gender equality has increased income and job creation opportunities to government policies emphasizing equity between women and men in terms of our farming and other livelihood methods like fishing, and forest conservation. Recommendation and conclusion, I would like to say ecosystem and nature capital for agriculture for social transformation has been conserved through a sustainable land management and techniques for soil and water conservation. Thank you so much for giving Uganda the opportunity to intervene in this dialogue. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Alan. I mean, that's a really useful insight on the situation in Uganda, and particularly raise an issue, the role of women in agriculture, which I know Uganda has championed for a long time. I hope we get a chance to come back to that a bit later on and hear more about the role of women as environmental stewards in farming landscapes. But in the meantime, I'm going to jump onto our fourth panelist today, who is Femi Pinto, the Executive Director of the Non-Timber Forest Products Exchange Program for Asia, which is a regional network organization that supports and promotes strengthening the capacities of forest-dependent and indigenous communities to manage their forest natural resources sustainably. Femi has worked in the last 2 decades as senior manager and advisor to local and regional and international NGOs working in the fields of community-based natural resource management, community forestry and river basin development, rights-based development, and sustainable livelihoods in the Philippines and in the lower Mekong region in Southeast Asia. So Femi, welcome to the discussion today. Very interested to hear from you, your perspective as an Indigenous peoples representative. Can you tell us about the role that Indigenous people play with regards to sustainable agricultural practices, and how can Indigenous peoples' perspective be integrated into nature-based solutions for better food systems?
Thank you, John, and good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone, wherever you are. And thanks for inviting NTFP to this important dialogue and to contribute to a critical year of discussions and hopefully decisive actions. I was also attending virtually the recently concluded Conservation Congress. So we see that the interesting proposition of nature-based solutions is starting to gain some traction. And you've described already from where I come from NTFP. But I also wanted to say that, to share that NTFP also currently helps to coordinate and serve as a secretariat or regional hub for the ICCA consortium in Southeast Asia. And this is the consortium for indigenous community and locally conserved areas and territories, and where we also strongly advocate and are mobilized to push for indigenous community voices and recognition of indigenous territories of life and their right to sustainable livelihood and food security. So to go straight to the question of what role can indigenous peoples play with regards to sustainable agriculture practices, very significant. And how can indigenous peoples' perspectives be integrated in nature-based solutions for better food systems, very central. So by way of context, in Southeast Asia, an estimate of at least 15 million hectares are effectively conserved and managed by indigenous peoples and local communities, largely through their traditional sustainable conservation measures and practices and customary governance and resource management systems to secure their food, to harvest, gather, cultivate, plant, preserve, protect, and conserve within their territories, ancestral domains, or their customary forested landscapes. By customary systems, this includes their various indigenous foodways, including rotational farming, hunting, gathering, fishing, trapping, food gardens, and domestication. Some of these traditional systems focus on non-mainstream crops. So may I ask for the slides, the 3 key message slides? So, so we just have these 3 key messages, basically also reiterating some of the highlight key messages that we also heard in the recent Conservation Congress, and you'll see that also captioned in the slides. But the first one, so indigenous rights, indigenous knowledge systems and practices need to be central to nature-based solutions. knowledge, awareness, and inclusion of these in the development, study, and resourcing of nature-based solutions and sustainable agriculture models are critical towards the future, if not only for the effective maintenance and protection of the significant area, that's 15 million at least, 15 million hectares at least in Southeast Asia, not including the other regions that they are already currently holding and managing, but also could provide strong application and replication value to other intact and productive landscapes. So next slide. And the second key message is that tenure will bring back the integrity of forests and the integrity of food systems that has a strong foundation around the vibrancy and dynamism of indigenous food systems. That of the 6,000 plus plants cultivated for food, fewer than 200 contribute to the global food output. But of these 200, just 9 of them account for 66% of the crop production in terms of weight: sugarcane, rice, maize, wheat, cassava, potato, sugar beet, oil palm fruit, and soya bean. But on the other hand, of the 4,000 recorded wild foods, 24%, however, are already decreasing in status. And contributions to the decline are, as we all know, forest conversions, changes in land use for other industrial and extractive purposes, but also food policies and subsidies that also contribute as drivers to this decline. But however, if we see an average indigenous forest village, say in India, in Indonesia, or Thailand, or the Philippines, they may list up to 400 wild foods found in the area. So we think that exploring wild foods and wild food systems is vital indigenous knowledge-based solutions, deliberately not using nature-based solutions, to food security, livelihood, and biodiversity matter. These foods are customarily included in the diet of local communities in different ways or forms. The intangible aspects of wild food are also deeply related to the culture and identity of indigenous peoples and local communities. Harvesting and utilizing wild foods require knowledge on identification of plant and animal foods, and these are often passed down across generations in both active and passive ways. But there are currently many facets to the challenges around wild foods availability, including fundamentally, as I mentioned, tenure, security, and recognition, the continuity of intergenerational knowledge, cultural changes brought about by migration, urban influences, the double-edged sword of rejuvenation of food versus exploitation and commercialization. And we heard deforestation, forest degradation, monocultures, etc. So research and inquiry in wild foods and indigenous food systems can look into the aspect of conservation and resource management initiatives that are food-focused and conduct studies that explore how wild foods are conserved, restored, and are being revitalized already by the communities themselves, or in cooperation with others under partnership programs and the like. Next slide, and the last one. So in the discourse about nature-based solutions, food systems, and sustainable agriculture, we should consider the enhancement, protection, and restoration of indigenous foodways. We see the need for dedicated attention, work, and resourcing on indigenous foodways protection, restoration, and revitalization. Continuous updating of knowledge on traditions, cultural systems, and practices, including of rotational farming, gathering, food gardens, etc., and their strengths and vibrancy should be known better in the local context as also the threats that they face. The work on wild foods, as I mentioned, requires continuous updating with new foods and the knowledge and status around them documented. This includes gaps in knowledge observed with the communities during many workshops and the appropriate interventions to be designed to fill them, and also to make clear the traditional uses and the link between wild foods and their nutritional values. Lastly, I just list a few actions and perspectives to be considered in nature-based solutions, like awareness building and knowledge transfers, intergenerational knowledge transfers, build awareness about the benefits of wild foods, hold activities that will facilitate this knowledge and skills transfer, documentation and action research, creating accessible materials of wild food as memory triggers to push for practice, and support community seed banking, rotational farming, observance of fallow periods and guided fallows to have the potential to improve forest quality, establishing community managed fish hatcheries and forest gardens, and pursuing multiple use strategies and community-based management plans that are environmentally sound and food-focused, and including here our works in the development and documentation of harvest protocols, and also including also species augmentation through nurseries with focus on food accompanied by supporting tools for harvest. These are some of the areas in which we think could also be included in the discussions. And I have also joined some of the dialogues for the Food Systems Summit, and we do see still a big gap in this area on wild foods and indigenous food systems. So I hope that it can be, there's still time to include that as a lead up to the summit in a couple of weeks.
Well, that's
Thank you.
great, Femi. Thank you for that input. And I hope I can also come back to you with some further questions around the role of Indigenous peoples and any risks to intellectual property and traditional approaches and rights. But let me pause for a moment and speak to our audience directly. I hope that you're finding many questions are being provoked by these interventions. Please put your questions into the Q&A, and I'll do my best to relay them to the speakers. I also have my own questions, which I'd love to come back to the speakers with, but let me just pause and ask Diane and the organizers if there's any video or any other message that needs to be presented at this moment.
Indeed, we have a special guest with us. So I will let my colleague pass on the slides to announce the special guest, and I will let also our special guest to unmute herself, present herself, and deliver a short message before we start the discussion. Welcome, Marie-Claire.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me here. As mentioned, I will quickly introduce myself as I'm the special guest, so I think I will take on the moderation. And I have the privilege to actually serve in two spaces, a very important space when it comes to nature-based solutions. On one hand side, with thousands of young people, we are building the youth network in the UN climate change space, where increasingly we're talking about nature-based solutions, but also I have been serving, or I'm still serving for 1 or 2 more weeks for the Food Systems Summit, where I'm also coordinating a lot of young people. And also there, of course, climate change, biodiversity, nature-based solution came on very, very strong. And yeah, we have been using the last months and years to come up with our own position, and I'm very happy that Femi Pinto, you already mentioned the intergenerational equity and dialogue, and what we are seeing, of course, that young people are still not on, we are on the front lines very often of the disasters, but we are not on the forefront when it comes to decision making. So we have been seeing that there is actually quite a lack of young people engaged in shaping what nature-based solution actually means to young people. How can we become also how can we fight for nature-based solution? And then we also saw that we have quite some different understandings, and I'm very happy that the indigenous people are already one step ahead of us and have some very clear understanding. That's actually why we have been working for the last month a very intersectional group. So we have been the Biodiversity Youth Network, the Climate Youth Network, and also the Food Systems Young People. We all came together with Youth for Nature and have been putting up, and actually I'm sharing this and doing a little advertisement now. I'm sharing this afterwards in the chat. We have been working on a youth position on nature-based solutions, so that young people are a central part when it comes to nature-based solution. And in regards to the food system, as well, there we have been hearing how important the nature-based solutions are also to combat the other crises. Nevertheless, what we also see, there is quite a lack, not only, but especially also amongst young people, how they can actually implement these practices when they're doing farming. Farming in many parts of the world is unfortunately not too attractive for young people. And I think the approach of nature-based solution, how they can contribute to the bigger picture when it comes to climate, biodiversity, can make farming very attractive. So beside all of the rather natural science aspects, I think there is a very, very important social aspect. We already talked about this before, where we can make farming and food systems way more attractive to young people. And for all the not young people in the call, I hope that you can use your voice as well to advocate for young people, because very often, unfortunately, they are still not sitting at the table when decisions are taken. So whenever you have the opportunity, please include young people when it comes to negotiations, when it comes to decision, but also when it comes, for example, to funding. Engage young people in your projects. It's very, very crucial that we have a very strong group of young people engaged and also learning from all the knowledge you have been already putting forward. I'm allowing you to quickly share the link, and with this, I'm handing over back to Jonathan. Thank you so much for giving me quickly the floor.
That's a pleasure. Many thanks. Thank you for joining us, Marie-Claire. We saw in Marseille last week just how influential the voices of young people, activists can be in so many different events, and there's growing representation, but you're right, access to government remains quite privileged. So I'm still encouraging people to send their questions in, but in the meantime, I'm going to go back to our panelists and pick up the conversation where you left off, or where we left off before. I'm going back to James to begin with. You talked about how many of the barriers lie with governments, if I understood you correctly, challenges with governments to adopt fresh thinking. I mean, the Food Systems Summit is balancing quite a lot of different challenges in these different streams and pillars. I'm sure some of them could be seen as competing against the environmental considerations that concern us here today. I mean, how much of a risk is this? Do you think there's really an appetite for compromise, or is there a risk that the conversations on food sustainability could end up even being politicized or overtaken by other concerns around food sovereignty or food security or other urgent questions?
Thanks, John. Well, all of the above, right? I mean, this I think is kind of the beauty and the pain of it. And if we're not prepared, if you like, to kind of have those difficult conversations, then I'm not sure and that's something you and I discussed actually privately, is that if we're not prepared to kind of have these difficult conversations, then I don't know how we're going to, for example, bring the issue around, let's take it for example, livestock products and sustainable diets and One Health. How can we bring those together, right? I think what is fascinating about where we stand now is that this summit has succeeded in bringing unusual suspects together, often for the first time. And the 23rd of September may well, I feel that it's very much the start, it's the point of departure. So I'm not sure much will be sort of solved on the 23rd of September. In fact, I'm sure not much will be solved. But like I said in my intervention, the whole point of bringing in different partners with different perspectives, different hopes, dreams, aspirations, is proving to be quite, I think, a good model to define, okay, what are the priorities at the country level? How can we rethink the way that we work at the country level? And, you know, there is this tension, I've got to say, there's this tension between technology and nature-based solutions. And that is a tension that I suppose will always be there. And I think it's probably a tension that's been there for thousands of years, you know. But now it's much more accelerated. So I think there has to be very much a sort of middle road, if you like, that we embrace that nature needs to be brought back in many ways, that nature has a very important role to play in sequestering carbon, making sure that agri-biodiversity is maintained, that in fact food production can be a positive thing within our food system when it comes to the environmental and nutritional part of the piece. And that allying that then with some of the technology that's coming through that's really so important when it comes to precision application fertilizer, etc., drone technology. You know, you can't cut your nose off to spite your face. You know, we are in a situation where food systems are unbelievably efficient at doing what they have been set up to do, which is produce calories at a very cheap price. Now, if we can bring that hardcore efficiency, but bring in the sustainability element to that, then why can't we do the same? Why can't we have that same approach brought in to ensure then that we have this hardcore efficiency when it comes to nature positive, when it comes to carbon sequestration? I think that's really where we have to move the dial, if you like, over.
Yeah, no, thanks, Phil. Well, let me ask Alan maybe to come back in. Coming from Uganda, perhaps you can give us a bit more of the country perspective. So Uganda and Ugandan scientists and others are active in the UN Food Systems Summit process. But as we've heard, it's a day, and what happens afterwards remains to be seen. How do you see this translating into action back in Uganda? Uganda wants to produce a lot more calories at a cheap price. For sure, that's a high priority. So where do you see environmental considerations fitting in, and what do you think of the levers? How are we going to convince the Ministry of Agriculture? How are we going to convince agri-businesses and farmers to take sustainability seriously?
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, you know, of course, yeah, I mean, our agriculture, it's ironic that agriculture is again, as an activity, is bound to, you know, to cause nature destruction. For example, you know, cutting down forests or trees, or, you know, or reclaiming wetlands for agricultural use. But as a government, you know, it's the role of government is to encourage, you know, all those involved in economic activities of, you know, farming, you know, to you know, you know, to leave, you know, some land for forest cover, or to try to, you know, to fertilizer, you know, use of fertilizers or modern methods of farming, like preserving some land for, you know, for recovery and all. You know, the whole land at cultivation system in Uganda is to encourage those involved in agriculture to practice methods of farming that will encourage conservation of, you know, the environment. Because at the end of the day, if the environment is destructed and there's too much rainfall or too much sunshine or drought, we are bound to, you know, to slide into a famine or destruction of our crops. So it's basically trying to encourage gradually our people and farmers to practice these modern farming methods to strike a balance between food production and conservation of nature. Thank you, Jonathan.
No, thank you, Alan. That's helpful. And I know from my own visits to Uganda that there are lots of examples of sustainable farming that are piloted and working. I guess the question is scaling up. I've got one question from the audience so far, from Colin Hanahan, which I will come to. But while we're on this theme, let me just throw it back to Frank first of all, and say, Frank, what are you seeing here as the levers for large-scale adoption? We know the practice. There's hundreds of them documented that seem to work. How do we convince farmers, and how do we start by convincing policymakers that this is in their national interest?
It's a very good question. I want to come back to what Alan and James just said. I think it's this trade-off which we always state between conservation on the one side and food production on the other side. This leads to a polarization between the positions, which is just not very helpful. And I agree with James that it's very much possible to optimize all these objectives of the food system: conservation, healthy diets, climate change mitigation, and so on, with the right approaches. So it's not about, okay, we need to spare land for conservation. That means on the other land, we have to produce much more intensively. I think that's a myth, and we have to overcome this feed the world mentality, if you wish. And I believe that on the levers, how to get there, it's, I mean, there are many, and probably the most powerful one is that you're looking at the rules of the game. You're looking at what does the society want from the food system to perform and to achieve. And in the moment, these rules, these policies, they are set, as James said, to produce cheap calories in a massive way. They are sometimes also, now in the context of Africa, built from the perspective of export crops, of cash crops, which are exported. And if we take food systems serious and we say, hey, these are the objectives of a food system, we want to have healthy food available for all, produced in a way that it is conserving the resources on which it depends, that it's enhancing biodiversity. If we accept these objectives, then that means we have to put all this together, and we need to coherently align the policies with these objectives, which in the moment they are not. The problem is here that, well, political economy is coming in. There are certain interests of continuing the business models which have been brought up and which are driving today the majority of the food systems. And a change of these business models, it's very much possible. It's not a question of technologies, but certain people, certain businesses may lose, and they have a strong influence, they have a lot of power. So how can we set the societal goals higher than these private interests of a few, and say, hey, this is what the system needs to deliver. We help you to transition, we help you to get there. And I think this is where the strongest lever is needed. There are many more points to state there, but I don't want to take too much time. I hope I get the chance to mention them later.
Well, no, that's really helpful, Frankie. Thank you for that. We'll come back to you before the end of the meeting. You'll get another chance to speak, I hope. But I do want to throw this question now to Femi. There was a question from Colin Hanahan in the audience. He says, thanks, Ms. Pinto, for your very interesting comments on Indigenous food system practices. The topic of wild food is particularly interesting, and considering the history of Indigenous peoples in North America and in Amazonia shaping their environment to encourage the growth of wild food, do you think these practices could be re-implemented to support modern food systems in a significant way? And how could implementation be supported? Well, thank you for the question, Colin. And Femi, what's your thoughts on that?
The perspective that I have just shared is basically very much Indigenous people and local perspective, and it comes with the message that thinking about global food systems, before doing that, think about the local context, and these food systems have to be locally controlled. In this case, Indigenous controlled. They have been able to prove that they are able to feed themselves, so long as there are no barriers to them being able to continually practice their food systems. So it's not so much integrating into the modern system, so to speak, but to try and see and rationalize the problem that we currently face and how to rationalize a solution. So there are solutions that have to be really localized, and it doesn't have to have too much of a macro perspective. We're also saying that in the wild foods context, you can also look at it from a landscape perspective, because they are able, say, for example, the Indigenous peoples are able, with these Indigenous food systems, able to really keep their area intact, but continuing to practice, and they actually help to enhance the ecosystem services that can also provide for example, these ecosystem services that could be provisions also for lowland populations with their farming and etc. And they are able to contribute. So in a way, yes, by able to continue to practice, maybe crop production in the lowlands can then be can also be served well. And that's maybe you can say in a way integrating into the modern system, so to speak. I hope that that makes sense.
Certainly makes sense. I hope Colin will write and tell us if it answers his question, but I thought it was a very helpful answer. It begs a question that I really would like to follow up with you, Femi, if you don't mind. In Marseille last week, there was an interesting discussion on scaling up nature-based solutions. So scaling up is one of the 8 criteria of nature-based solutions in the standard. But scaling up usually implies bringing in private investment. If we're going to take things to serious scale, it means private investment, and private companies are really excited by nature-based solutions. On the other hand, we're hearing that many nature-based solutions are ideas that originate with Indigenous people, local communities. It's local and Indigenous knowledge. What do you see as the risks of kind of breach of intellectual property and cultural heritage and appropriation of that knowledge by big businesses and then profiting at the expense of local communities? How would you manage those kind of risks?
Yeah, there's certainly a big risk to kind of say, oh, nature-based solutions, then helicopter, the helicopter, the development way of just coming in and say, oh, large tracts of territory still being left intact, and yes, we'll work with the Indigenous peoples because they have proven to really been able to conserve their biodiversity. At the same time, really have that potential to, they're sitting in this bed of resources. But if you go also back to the message that were delivered by under the Global Indigenous Peoples Agenda, they were giving conditions. Indigenous peoples are also giving conditions about the way in which these solutions and investments could be channeled and how. And these conditions include the free, prior, and informed consent, who sits at these investment discussions. Very much recurring in their message is that bring us in. We can be in the discourse with you. We can be in the thinking with you. There might be a sense saying that, oh, the finance realm is not for them and large investments are not for them. I think on the contrary, the weight and the power that they have also exercised during the Congress is proof of that. They were speaking of the kind of mechanisms that would be useful for them, for Indigenous peoples, saying that also financing mechanisms should also include them. And in fact, one of the main message was set up an Indigenous Peoples Fund that will be also controlled and decided upon by Indigenous peoples organizations or networks. So yeah, I think
there are mechanisms in place, but more mechanisms needed by this and more opportunities there, definitely. Yeah. That's great. Thank you, Femi. Frank, you want to respond on that?
If I can come in here, I think it's very valid what Femi just said, but we shouldn't forget that there are also small investments into small and medium enterprises that work at the local level. And I think this is where money needs to go. And many of them are doing a great job in linking smallholders or Indigenous people to markets, in supporting with inputs which are really based on nature and so on. And they find it really difficult to get investments, to get capital for their valuable work, because most investors, they look at the big ticket size, they need to have big returns and so on. And I think it's crucial to find out how can we overcome these hurdles and bottlenecks so that more investments can flow in this direction. And we are organizing on Thursday an event on how to do this. What are the approaches to overcome these obstacles, which I would like to paste here in the chat if I can. I'm not sure if that works. Yes, should work. Have a look there if you're interested in this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Yes, I was going to ask. I mean, that's a recurrent problem. Financing the change, linking public incentives perhaps to enable the change and to incentivize the investments. But I was talking to farmers in the UK recently, where they're also going through a major policy shift towards more environmental services. And even farmers there are raising the same questions of where are the innovations in financing this? That's where the forefront, the cutting edge of innovation, I think, is needed. We're into the last 15, 14 minutes of the dialogue, and therefore I think it's time to start wrapping up. I don't see any more questions from our audience, and so I'm going to go back down the panel one by one, starting with James, to ask you if you could give us your main takeaway message based on what we've been discussing around nature-based solutions in the food and agriculture system. James, are you ready to take that on?
Absolutely, John. Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is that better? Okay.
Yeah,
my main takeaway. Well, from my side, I think we have an opportunity now, going forward, that I don't think was there 2 or 3 years ago. And I think it's an opportunity to work with member states, to work with countries to really mainstream nature-based solutions in the new pathways that are being developed. Now, there are 2 things on that I think that are important. The first one is that we get the how. How is that going to happen? The governance, right? And that's something that definitely is emerging as a key outcome of the summit. That we all know what we have to do, but we don't know how to do it. And then the second point, I think, is that we're at the is that not only are we at the start of this journey, but we also have to understand that NBS, and if we want it mainstream, doesn't exist in a vacuum. We've got to be realistic in the current state of our food system and see how we can bring NBS in as a discussion, as a dialogue, to work hand in hand with technology. And I think if we do that, I think we can create, if you like, this middle road, as opposed to creating more of a polarized discussion about, well, it's this way or the highway, which I think we've understood in the last few years doesn't really work. So those are my the takeaways, John. Thank you.
that's fantastic. Thank you, James. Frank, over to you. Your takeaway messages for the audience.
Thanks, Jonathan. Well, on this topic of how to scale up nature-based solutions in food systems, in my experience, there are 4 key levers on which we all need to work simultaneously. I've already mentioned some. First is to jointly develop the knowledge in a participatory way, building on the knowledge of local communities, and to disseminate this knowledge so that it can be applied in a context-specific way. Secondly is to coherently align the policies which are guiding food systems so that very bad practices are banned or regulated, that there are incentives for continuous improvement, for better practices, and that really sustainable, transformative approaches like agroecologies are scaled up. The third one is to invest in agroecological businesses, particularly the small ones, medium enterprises at the local level. And fourth one, last but not the least, also to sensitize and to enter into a dialogue with the consumers, with the citizens, so that they understand what they eat and how it is produced. This is shaping our planet. If we are moving these 4 levers, we can really get somewhere. Thank you.
That was great, Frank. Very, very thorough, very organized feedback. Let me throw it now to Alan. Alan, your takeaway messages from this discussion.
Yeah, thank you, John. My takeaway message is basically to to continue to encourage our our people in Uganda, our predominant agriculture-based households, to embrace nature-based solutions to to economic activity, at the same time also ensuring that they are not there's conservation of forests, wetlands, natural water resources, and so as much as though we want to as a source of livelihood, though we want to live, same time we shouldn't be destructive to these natural sources that would be detrimental to our our livelihoods. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Alan. And over to Femi, your takeaway messages from this discussion.
Yes, I at the risk of being repetitive also for some of the messages that were also shared in the last Congress about thinking of a rights-based approach. So I think James had mentioned about governance. I think that is really key. And also I would add inclusion, the idea of inclusive food systems. And from the perspective of what I was sharing, Indigenous peoples and local communities, that they have to necessarily be part of the thinking, and of these as think also of these as local Indigenous solutions, and that would necessarily be much more appropriate rather than coming in with a technical approach. Could be also sexy and interesting for investors, but definitely not to lose sight of that fact, and that Indigenous peoples do have their working systems already, and that they could definitely teach us a lot of what could be sustainable and what could be also something that can feed not just locally, but possibly also teach a lesson or two for the rest of the world. Thank you.
That's great. Well, thank you, Femi. Thank you all for your input. I'm going to maybe just give my own parting messages. I'm not going to try and summarize, since that would also just repeat what's gone before. And also my notes are quite disorganized anyway. But I took a couple of interesting points away from this discussion. I picked up on this tension. Is it a tension between technology and nature-based solutions? I'm not sure that we of course, there will be a tension, and there will be the perception that these might be pulling in opposite directions. But I think, we hear this word repurposing quite a lot. We've got these huge amounts of subsidy being pumped into the status quo, propping up an agricultural system that is undermining its own future. There's a lot of discussion about repurposing those subsidies and using them to reward the environmental benefits of sustainable farming. I think we should also be thinking about repurposing scientific and technological development. I don't think we'll win if nature-based solutions is, I used to work in the organic sector, and it was easy for farmers to dismiss it as muck and magic and then say, non-scientific, that's the old way of doing things. But actually we should be repurposing science and technology towards a future of farming that is technology and science-based, but fundamentally still respectful of and dependent on nature. And I think that's an important area where we still need to clarify what that means and what does that look like. I think it's important also to note, given the scale of those subsidies, that the money is there, and we need to think how we use that money better. And the point that we raised earlier about the frontier for innovation now is innovative financing to enable this change, connecting big money down to smallholder producers, Indigenous peoples, women farmers, many of whom don't have bank accounts, might have poor access to markets, not well connected to value chains. And I think there's a lot of scope for innovation there, urgent innovation, if we're going to see scale up. An important point for us in our work, which all of you mentioned, is the importance of partnership, local knowledge, respect for the rights of the producers, indigenous peoples, as well as local communities, farmers, whether they're smallholders, family farmers, and making sure that we co-develop solutions. And that's not just solutions at a practical level on the ground, but co-develop policies, ensure that policies are responsive to the needs of farmers. Remembering that farming is a risky business, and farmers at the end of the day have to carve out a living and look after their families. It's a very difficult profession to be involved in. One thought that crossed my mind last week when we were discussing this in Marseille, when people raised this question of the true cost of food. I think understanding the true cost of food is very valuable. But if we're thinking about nature-based solutions, we mustn't forget that nature-based solutions generate external benefits. So as well as the true cost of food, we have to understand the true value of sustainably managing agricultural ecosystems. And I think that's a huge area where we don't understand the power of nature-based solutions to simultaneously provide food security and water security and contribute to mitigating climate change and conserving biodiversity, and the list goes on. And when we start connecting all of those values back to farmers as those service providers, and making sure that they translate into real income for farmers, improving profitability and productivity first rather than production per se, I think that's when we start seeing opportunities for progress. So that's my parting shot. I am going to hand back to the organizers, but first I must thank the panelists for really excellent contributions and for really interacting and responding to each other's inputs. I'd like to thank the audience for joining us today, and I'd like to thank the Geneva Environment Network for setting up this event. Diana, back to you.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you also for moderating the event efficiently. As we are now closing this event, just a few words to announce you that the next session of these dialogues will focus on the oceans. It's going to take place in 2 weeks' time, every Monday, 3 p.m. Geneva time. And also for those of you who are interested for other topics than just nature-based solutions, we will be active. The Human Rights Council has started today in Geneva. Actually, it was the first day with the important statement at this moment as we are speaking here taking place at the Human Rights Council on the right to a healthy environment. And we will be ourselves involved in various side events there. One this week on climate, where we will present the IPCC report at the Human Rights Council. And next week, with the Special Rapporteur on Toxic Substances, we'll also be active discussing plastic and science and pollution. So with that, I think we can close, and a big thank you also to our attendees and to who will be watching this video later. Thank you all. And last but not least, all those